The Lord of the Rings was published in 1954 by John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. It's been almost 70 years, and it's hard just to wrap our minds around the extent to which The Lord of the Rings has not only influenced pop culture and fantasy, but has influenced the way we think about the ancient world. I'm out here in the woods today, not just because it's beautiful. The frost is out here on the branches. It's just incredible. But I wanted to speak a little bit about The Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's writings. Tolkien's Middle-earth has been incredibly influential on my own life, on how I see the world, and it's helped, to a great extent, imbue a deep love and fascination with Northern European mythology and history and culture. A student at Oxford, when the Great War broke out in 1914, Tolkien remained an extra year to finish his Oxford exams before volunteering to serve in the British Army. Tolkien ended up seeing the front lines of one of the most brutal wars in human history, where the nations of Europe threw themselves into truly modern warfare for the first time. A real meat grinder where the old values of chivalry and man against man, honorable conquest, met industrialized, mechanized killing with some of the most innovative methods for killing masses of soldiers who didn't stand a chance at fighting back, no matter how strong they were, no matter how good their training was. No amount of chivalry, no amount of training in combat can prepare you for being ripped apart by an incoming artillery barrage from 10 kilometers away. If World War I is one of the worst wars to experience, then Tolkien experienced some of the worst of World War I, being in the Battle of the Somme, where 3 million soldiers participated between the French, the English, and the Germans in this enormous conflict, and where 1 million soldiers were slaughtered. One of the influences I think you can see directly with World War I going into his writing are in the Dead Marshes, reminiscent of the Battle of Passchendaele, where you have countless soldiers who are just sunk deep into the muddy water, looking up forever, unable to get out. And it's really a haunting picture of the sort of warfare that Tolkien experienced. What's surprising about all this is that despite experiencing the worst of human experience in war, he doesn't appear to have become just a cynic. He still believes that there are things worth fighting for. The Lord of the Rings and the stories of Middle-earth are filled with battles and heroes and glory and chivalry. Wow. So I've seen some beautiful forests in my day, but I ventured farther back than I normally do out here, and everything is frost. It's truly something out of Narnia. I mean, it's just extraordinary out here. For the modern reader or viewer, Lord of the Rings, it may appear to be another familiar fantasy series, albeit perhaps a bit better written. Really misses what's at the heart and the core of Tolkien's work. In Tolkien's writing, we find a monumental achievement to convey and to rebirth far older stories in European history and mythology. Things that have been lost to time and things that cannot simply be expressed in history books. The Lord of the Rings has been so influential in doing so that nearly every fantasy series to follow, from Game of Thrones to Warhammer Fantasy to Dungeons and Dragons and World of Warcraft, has followed and copied an enormous amount from his template. The Lord of the Rings as a literary work is far more than the sum of its parts. It's a synthesis and expansion of the great works and unwritten folklore which precede it. Further, it's the culmination of thousands of years of Indo-European and Germanic folklore and mythology, baptized into the Christian metaphysic, and lovingly restored into the modern age. Tolkien's unparalleled achievement was in crafting a fantasy setting which cohesively integrated all of these elements in a clear way, without diluting the material which inspired it, nor sacrificing the beauty and richness of the Christian and Indo-European stories which preceded it. The Proto-Indo-Europeans were an ethno-linguistic group who spread from the Western Steppe and the Pontic-Caspian Steppe into the heart of Europe. The Proto-Indo-Europeans are believed to have domesticated horses, mastered charioteering, and ranged from the Danube to the edge of the Mongol Eastern Steppe. These horse masters conquered the vast majority of the European continent over several thousand years, an equestrian martial legacy that the Rohirrim display fully. These Indo-Europeans displaced and genetically replaced much of the existing European hunter-gatherer populations who preceded them throughout Europe, from Greece to the British Isles, although the replacement was especially strong in the northern regions of the continent. From research conducted by Wolfgang Hack and colleagues, the Proto-Indo-European language from which the English, German, Scandinavian, and many Celtic languages are derived, was a key basis for continued cultural interactions between the northern Indo-European Germanic peoples for thousands of years. Because languages such as Old Norse and Old English were sister tongues, folklore, religion, and mythology maintained their cohesion between those Germanics on the continent and those in Britain and Scandinavia, which is why gods and folk heroes would be recognizable across the northern region of the continent. To give an example, the Old Norse Odin, the English Woden, or the German Wotan all refer to the same progenitor god-king shared among these peoples. For the Anglo-Saxons themselves, being tribes of northern Germanic stock, migrating from modern-day southern Denmark and northern Germany, the importance of these common mythological figures was paramount. Even King Alfred the Great, renowned in his devotion to his Christian faith, derived his legitimacy as the King of England from tracing his patrilineal lineage back to Woden, also known as Odin, as recorded in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles. The Icelandic sagas are another such source from which modern scholars learn the significance these stories had for the people of their age, in sagas such as Volsunga Saga and Heimskringla. These writings, recorded by Snorri Sturluson around the 13th century, are only surviving accounts of many of these mythological tales and histories, including those of the legends of the Germanic gods, warriors, and kings, such as Odin, Thor, and Freyr. For Tolkien, who was both a linguistic scholar and a writer, the languages and stories of the past, of his ancestry, filled with their dwarves and elves and dragons and great warriors of old, offered an immeasurably rich well of inspiration and archetypal structures for Tolkien to draw from. J.R.R. Tolkien himself crafted entire unique languages for several of the races of his fantasy legendarium, and did his own translations of Beowulf from its original Old English. His mastery of both Old English and Old Norse and their associated traditions was born of passion and meticulous study, in ways that modern writers, and especially modern screenwriters, can rarely hold a candle to. Clear signs of this Old Norse and Old English inspiration in the formation of Tolkien's fantasy writings can be seen throughout the naming of characters such as Gandalf, Gimli, Fili, Kili, Dwalin, and Thorin, which can all be found throughout the entirety of his writings and are taken directly from Old Norse sagas. Middle-earth itself was a term used by the English, Middle-earth in Old English, and Norse Midgardr or Midgard. They used this term to describe the world they inhabited, as is used in writings such as the Anglo-Saxon poem, The Wanderer. Further proof that Tolkien was deeply inspired by the spirit of Germanic antiquity can be found in examples such as this parallel verse in The Wanderer with the Old English taken from James Bright's An Anglo-Saxon Reader. This following segment from The Wanderer is echoed by Aragorn when he sings a lament in The Lord of the Rings. Aragorn says in this passage, "Where now the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing? Where is the horse gone? Where the young man?" To understand Middle-earth as J.R.R. Tolkien wrote it, it's helpful to understand his Legendarium as the final stage of baptism for the old pre-Christian Northern European world, the Christianization of which had been a bloodier process than with the Mediterranean peoples to the south. In this baptism, the Northern European ethnos finds its full aesthetic and folk soul expression within the guiding morality and metaphysics of Christianity. As is evident in Snorri Sturluson's accounts of the sagas and the Old English writings, the pagan stories had already begun a profound process of Christianization, to the point where the Genesis account of creation forms the starting point of Germanic history at the beginning of the Prose Edda. Just as with the Christianization of pagan Greece and the baptism of its pantheon into the Christian ethos during the Renaissance, the mythology and spirit of the North underwent a similar conversion process. For Tolkien, himself a devout Catholic, this process is found wherever Christianity takes the spirit of a people as God created them, and brings out the most virtuous and true expressions of their spirit, which have been dirtied and muddied by sinfulness, much like the cleaning and restoration of an old rusty piece of armor into something shiny and glorious once again. In many ways, Tolkien's work as a literary movement mirrors the achievements of Sandro Botticelli, a Catholic Renaissance artist who created some of the most iconic paintings of the pagan gods of ancient Greece in a context of Christian devotion, which added a clear infusion of Christian iconography and subtext to the aesthetic expressions and the ethnic spirit of the Greeks through their mythos, as can be seen in such works as The Birth of Venus and Calumny of Apelles. While The Lord of the Rings is by no means allegorical, as Tolkien himself had expressed distaste for allegory in fiction, it instead functions as a self-contained story of the races of Middle-earth, sending representatives to work together against a common enemy. The hobbits of the Shire are imbued with the English spirit, as can be seen clearly in their mannerisms, their love of fine ale and hearth and home. Each race and nation of Middle-earth takes loving inspiration from the various peoples of Europe, with their unique qualities and visual distinctions brought to the fore in exaggerated fashion. Peter Jackson captures this excellently in the first act of the film, establishing the home the hobbits are fighting for, by showing the traditional way of life of the people as they've lived it for countless generations. In the extended edition of the first film, the audience is gifted a much longer time in Hobbiton, with the birthday party of Bilbo Baggins being particularly reminiscent of traditional May Day celebrations found in rural England to this day. Further showing Tolkien's mastery of incorporating Christian morality is his portrayal of heroism, as it can be seen fully in The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien's idea of heroism transcends the Nietzschean framework of master morality and slave morality. Much of modern fiction follows Nietzsche's definition of slave morality, wherein the hero is a figure of low status and low quality, not born of noble or heroic blood, one who is often ugly or disformed in some way, who is empathized with because of their hardships and lowly position in life. Examples of this include Harry Potter, who's a scrawny boy abused by his aunt and uncle and cousin, but is whisked away to be the hero by magical forces outside of his doing. And superheroes like the Hulk and Spider-Man are frail nerds who gain incredible strength from fluke accidents. This is contrasted with master morality, which is more common in tales of old, through a character such as Beowulf, who is born of noble blood and is a powerful warrior from the start of the narrative, or Achilles and Hector, who are both of noble birth and are fierce and strong warriors born out of their own might. They begin naturally blessed by the gods, and use their own strength to achieve their heroism. The Fellowship of the Ring introduces a range of heroes who both embody master morality and a third sort of morality, one more akin to the biblical refrain of God calling on the unlikely and the lowly to be important servants, i.e. the hobbits as one example, who are neither strong of body nor of strict martial tradition. The hobbits are not oppressed, nor are they mighty, but live peacefully in their own cozy and well-cared-for lands. They're small of stature and keep to their own communities, not bothering the rest of Middle-earth. In the framework of master morality and slave morality, one might even say that the hobbits are disformed or cursed, because they're not as strong and not as fearsome as the other races of Middle-earth. Nonetheless, the hobbits are a virtuous race of Middle-earth, who are integral to the quest to destroy the ring because of their choices of moral fortitude, their courage that they display, and their love of home and country and willingness to sacrifice their own health and safety to help those others who are around them. Master morality, however, is also abundant in Middle-earth. It's embodied in characters such as Aragorn, who is of the line of the ancient High Gondorian king Isildur, and one of the Dunedain, giving him natural right to hold dominion over the Gondorians of Middle-earth. This understanding of natural hierarchy is embedded throughout the tales of Middle-earth, and was entirely intuitive to most Christians as well as students of Aristotle and Plato throughout history as an extension of the idea of the great chain of being. This natural hierarchy is essential to the subtext of Middle-earth, as it would have been for most Christians until the last century, where each person and each people group and each role in life fills a divinely ordained niche in the cosmos and holds together this superstructure, where the duties of the humble maidservant are as integral as the duties of the mightiest king, much like the New Testament teachings about the body of Christ, in which each person acts as part of a greater whole, with neither the foot nor the eye being any less essential than the other. And as shocking as this is to a modern sense of morality, Christian slaves are told to obey their masters with fear and trembling in the book of Ephesians. And likewise, masters are to be kind to their slaves. It's in this sense, too, that we are to be both slaves and friends to God, subordinating our own desires to His completely. And in this hierarchy of authority, God does not use His position to abuse Christians for being His servants or His slaves, but instead God uses the subordination that Christians have to God as a means of building them up to serve His kingdom. The Christian commits himself to that which is above and beyond man fully, and in doing so, God raises him up that we might even be called friends. The cinema masterpiece that is Peter Jackson's live-action film adaptation of The Lord of the Rings is praiseworthy in its aesthetic realization of the literature, from the quality of the directing and acting to the culturally rich costumes and set design, to the unparalleled classical score of Howard Shore and the John Howe-inspired scenery and atmosphere. The film delivers a vision of Tolkien's literature to audiences around the world, with particular spiritual resonance to Northern Europeans. Tolkien's original writings and Jackson's films are richly embedded and saturated with the Northern European spirit and aesthetics in all aspects, while triumphantly displaying its Christian understanding of virtue, meaning, love of folk and family, divine hierarchy, enchantment and stewardship and care of the natural world, and self-sacrifice for one's friend and for the world. Tolkien's magnum opus, that is his Legendarium, enshrines its work through stories of the past into becoming the countercultural literary achievement of the 20th century. It pulls the fires of ancient times into the stagnation of the present era through its aesthetics and values, which reinvigorate the hearts of people around the world and baptizes the Northern European mythos within the metaphysic of Christianity. For Nordhuger, I'm Matt. Catch you next time.